In this lecture, we will examine the service distributors provide and the 10 music distribution deal types. Let's first examine the question, why use a distributor in today's industry? The two main reasons are convenience and clout. Distributors already have the setup to press the albums, promote the release, and most important, they have the database of retail outlets broken down into target markets, lifestyles, demographics, and genres. That is real convenience. The second reason is the clout that the distributor carries. They specialize in distributing music that is up to standards. They also have the relationships with the retailers already established. Using a distributor makes life easier and can take you beyond the small reach of your local market. Now we know why we want to use them. Let's look closer at the basic services that distributors provide. The most basic service that a distributor provides is essentially what you think of when you think of distribution. They sell your music. They work for a commission, so sales is their forte. To sell your music, they provide buyers with catalogs and promotional information. Of course, they take orders from the retailers, but beyond that, they do accounting and payment and monitor the progress of your sales and check inventory with the retailers. These 5 basic services are a lot of work and require specialized skills. Small record labels start out self-distributing. But once the sales get to a substantial level of success, the management gets to be monstrous. That is why we use distributors. They are specialists and they have the capabilities to pick, pack, and ship with automated equipment as well. Let's look at some extended services that distributors can provide record labels and artists. Radio promotions are not typical, but some distributors will provide this service for a fee. Co-op advertising is the most popular extended service that distributors provide. Co-op is short for cooperative. With this type of service, the distributor coordinates the ad for the record label and retailer. They might even go in on the cost of the ad. It depends on the distributor involved. Historically, the retailer pays as well, but there are times when the label foots the bill and then mentions the retailer in the ad without asking for money from the retailer. This is typical of majors actually. Another type of extended service is record mastering. Some distributors, especially digital music aggregators, will offer to master your album for a cheap price. Record mastering is essential if you want your album to sound top quality. A mastering engineer will balance your sound levels for consistency and usually compress the sound for loudness. CD artwork design and barcoding are some other extended services. You learn about barcodes and retail design in your merchandising class. Manufacturing is a traditional extended service of a distributor. There's a distributor deal type that we will discuss later that is called a pressing and distribution deal, also known as manufacturing distribution deal. A newer extended service is called metadata entry. Metadata is known as data about data. That is data about data. So if you do metadata entry, you are entering the data about the data. For instance, you might enter the album name, the band name, and the format of the file into a database about a CD you just created. When someone puts that CD into their computer, they see the metadata pop up and say iTunes. If no one did the metadata entry, you would not be able to access the information. You would see unknown under the artist column. At this point, we've reviewed the basic and some extended services of distributors, from accounting to metadata entry. Let's now examine the 10 most popular distribution deals. The first one is distributing through another label. This is a typical scenario from a startup record label. The label is new, so does not have the connections established or the resources in place yet, so they utilize a bigger, more established label for those purposes. Slip and Slide Records, a popular hip-hop label, is known for distributing through other labels such as Atlantic Records. The second type of distribution deal that we will examine is the production deal. This type of deal is more involved than the simple one we just reviewed. There are 3 types of production deals that producers, such as Dr. Dre or Pharrell, can make with a distributor. We have the mini record deal, the joint venture, and the work for hire deal. The mini record deal is made by the biggest producers in the industry. These producers are trusted, credible producers that both artists and large distributors can trust. They are consistent in making hit records. With this deal type, the producer contracts with the artist and then shops the album to potential distributors. This producer can then contract one of three ways with the distributor. They can sign with the distributor for a master buyout. The buyout will usually pay the producer $25,000 per song. Additionally, a royalty is typical of this type of contract in the percentage of 12 to 14%. Remember, the producer is getting signed here, not the artist. The second mini record deal contract could be for a master license. This deal type is similar to a rent-to-own a home deal. The distributor contracts to distribute the master for a period of time with the option to buy. The license fee is usually about $5,000 to $25,000 per song. Now the third option for the producer is to become a label. This is the most typical scenario. Many bigger producers now have their own record labels. They sign the artist and then get a distribution deal as a label. They may have a deal with a major distributor, or they could have a deal with a true distributor. Every deal will be different depending on negotiations. The typical deal they will sign as a label is known as a pressing and distribution deal. Okay, so that is our first production deal type. Let's look at the second type, the joint venture. This is a partnership between the artist and the producer. In this type of deal, the producer and the artist are both up and coming. They are usually a bit new to the game but already have contacts in the industry. They are on equal footing here. This type of deal is usually dissolved by a major label buyout. That's what they want. In this deal, the artist pays for the recording and pays service fees to the producer. It's typical for the fees to be between $300 and $500 per song usually. Additionally, the producer gets 5% off the back end of sales under this type of contract. The third type of producer deal is the work for hire deal. This is a simple deal. The artist hires the producer for a solid fee per song, usually between $2,000 and $3,000 per song. The producer may get the 5% back-end payment here as well, but the artist fully owns their master here. With the other deal types, the producer has partial or full ownership of the master. To review the three producer deal types, we have the mini record deal, the joint venture, and the work for hire. Let's move on to the pressing and distribution deal, also known as the P&D deal. True distributors are the usual deal makers of this type, although some indies connected to majors will also do this deal. With this deal, the artist or label will pay the distributor for the physical manufacturing of the album, also known as pressing, and they will pay the distributor a commission for the sale of the albums. This deal can be more affordable and convenient for a record label. And the commission fee for a distributor is usually between 18 and 35%, depending on the success level of the artist. A brand new artist will pay the distributor a much higher commission fee than a top-selling artist. The fee is determined by the annual sales, so the harder a salesperson has to work, the more they will charge you. In fact, if you watched the Andy Allen video a few minutes ago, you learned that Alternative Distribution Alliance charges between 14.2% and 24% to their labels for distribution. ADA is not a true indie though, and so is more on point with the majors. The majors charge internal commission fees ranging from 10 to 14%. ADA charges 24% to those labels that do less than $1 million in sales a year, and 14.2% to those that do over $20 million in sales a year. Beyond the commission fee, a distributor will charge a label manufacturing and printing fees if they do the pressing of the album. The pressing and distribution deal is a typical distribution deal to be made. Let's move on to the joint venture. This deal type can be with anyone or any company. It could be between an artist and a distributing label, or a label and a distributor, or a producer and an artist, and so on and so on. This is a partnership, and the profits are split 50-50 after all expenses are paid. The division of responsibility varies according to negotiations. For instance, a label could supply the music recording and partner with a distributor that covers the marketing cost and efforts. The fifth distribution deal type is the uplift deal, also known as an upstream deal. This deal type is typically negotiated between a major distributor and an indie distributor or indie label. It works like this. The indie distributor creates demand for the album and distributes the album until it reaches a certain number of records sold. Once they hit a particular goal, the major distributor takes over distribution. The reason these deals exist is because a typical indie distributor cannot handle a huge amount of demand. Their resources are limited. Let's look at an example of this type of deal in action. There was a joint venture entity called OctJ LLC, created by Octone Records and RCA Music Group, J Records. OctJ had a contract with Sony BMG Distribution. Octone Records would develop artists and with the J Records resources, finance, market, and distribute albums until they hit 75,000 units sold. Now once they sold between 75,000 and 125,000 units, OctJ would then uplift that album to Sony BMG for bigger distribution. In the early stages of an artist's career, success is very speculative. The money invested is the riskiest in the business. These uplift deals rely on strong indie labels, such as Octone Records, to find artists with potential and develop them into what the market wants at that time. The uplift deal relies on a fantastic team to invest time and money into an artist and a product, and then uplift the product to a larger distributor to invest time and money. The financial reward can be great though. As James Denier, the founder of Octone Records, said in a Harvard Review article, "The dollars Sony BMG spends at the moment of the uplift are some of the surest dollars spent in the music business." The sixth type of distribution deal we will mention is the equity deal. This is currently the most popular deal type in the industry. You may know it as the 360. With this deal, the artist becomes a brand and the label adds value to all aspects of their career. In return, the label sells equity in everything related to the brand. Originally, labels made most of their money off of album sales. Now with digital piracy overwhelming the industry, the labels and distributors are evolving their business models and looking to make money in new and more creative ways. Music publishing and placement is now a key revenue stream for artists and labels. There's a lot of money to be made in an equity deal, but the artist loses most creative control. Madonna and Jay-Z are well known for their large equity deal payoffs. So let's move on to the standard deal. This is traditionally the most popular and standard in the industry. When you think of a band from the 80s, you can be pretty positive that this was the deal they had. The artist gets a royalty after costs are paid for in this deal type. The record label owns the copyright in this traditional deal. And there are actually three main deal points to negotiate in this type of deal. First is the term. How long will the album or artist be under contract with this particular distributor? The second deal point is the territory that the distributor will reach. And the third deal point to negotiate is the royalty rate for the artist. Traditional royalty calculations were based on the suggested retail list price of the album. There are still some record labels out there that use the suggested retail list price, but the royalty percentage was typically 7 to 25% of the SRLP. Now, royalty calculations are usually based on the wholesale price, which is called the PPD or the published price to dealers. It can also be called the card price. The royalty percentage is typically 14 to 30% of PPD. The primary determining factor on what percentage rate you get has everything to do with your status in the industry. Are you a newbie? Yes, then you would start out at a low 14% rate. But let's say that you start out at 14% rate and your album sales blow up within that first 30 to 60 days of the release. Should your royalty rate stay at a 14%? Absolutely not. We have what is called royalty escalations for times like these. Royalty escalations are based on sales numbers. Once an artist hits a particular number of albums sold, the royalty percentage should increase by half to 1 percentage point. One thing to check for in the contract for royalty escalations is to be sure that the next album option is starting at the end royalty rate. So if the royalties escalate from 14 to 15%, the next album royalties begin at the 15% rate. One last thing to say regarding escalations. The escalations are prospective as opposed to retroactive. For instance, if the rate went up by 1 percentage point, the artist does not get that 1 percentage point added to albums that were already sold before the escalation went into effect. So moving on, let's say that your album blew up in the United States and now Europe wants the album. How will you get this album to Europe? Will you ship units over to retailers or distributors? No. To get distribution in a foreign country, you will license the album rights for manufacturing and distribution to a distributor in that region. Royalties are reduced due to the extra middlemen and expenses involved, but it is well worth the added markets. Let's look at a chart from the Donald Passman book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business. According to the Passman chart, if an American artist were to get distribution in Canada, the artist would get about 85% of their contracted royalties. Now let's pretend that an artist is getting a 10% royalty to make it simple. If the artist were to get distribution in Canada, then they would get 85% of that 10% royalty, or 8.5% now. If the distribution is in the major territories, being United Kingdom, Australia, Italy, Japan, France, Holland, Germany, well, the royalty payments would be about 75% of the contracted amount. Translating that percentage to our examples of a 10% royalty rate would reduce that rate to 7.5% of PPD. And finally, we have rest of world, also known as ROW. These territories are not as typical and usually pay about 50% of the contracted rate. So a 10% royalty rate would be reduced by half to about 5%. Another way that an artist's royalties can be reduced is by the producer and mixer royalties. Before we get into the deduction, let's talk about the producer's role for a moment. What does a music producer do exactly? Well, a producer's job is to maximize the creative process in the making of a song or an album. They will find songwriters, creatively manage the arrangement of the recorded songs, hire mixing engineers and studio musicians, and ultimately polish the creative product. So with that being said, what do Alvin, Simon, and Theodore have to do with producer royalties? Well, it started out with Snuff Garrett, one of the biggest producers in the 50s and 60s. Snuff was the A&R guy / producer for Liberty Records in the days of Sonny and Cher. At that time, Liberty was run by its founder, Simon Waronker, its president, Alvin Bennett, and its chief recording engineer, Theodore Keep. I bet those names sound familiar. Simon, Alvin, Theodore. Snuff was making millions of dollars for Liberty, and so asked Alvin for a royalty of 1 cent per record. This idea was considered outrageous at the time, and Snuff was almost fired for asking, but after some negotiations, Snuff won the point. That is when producer royalties began. Let's examine what they've become in this day and age. A producer's royalty is usually around 3 or 4% if they are an outside producer hired into a project. The producer's royalty is usually 5 or 6% if the producer brings the artist to the label. Another point to understand regarding producer royalties is the phrase all in. If the phrase all in is used in terms of an artist royalty percentage, that means that the artist royalty percentage includes the producer and mixer royalties. For instance, if a new artist gets a 13% royalty all in and the producer gets a 3% royalty in the deal, then the artist's actual royalty is 10%. So let's talk about mixing engineers for a moment, because they sometimes get a royalty as well. A mixing engineer is an important part of the process as well. They take the raw recorded tracks from the recording engineer and tediously mix them until they sound balanced and perfectly orchestrated. Depending on their musical genre and status in the industry, they can get anywhere from 0.5 to 2% royalty. At this point, I want to mention your Week 1 assignment. This week, you are to calculate a 4-piece band's royalty profits. You will calculate these profits from sales of a gold record and a platinum record, respectively. There is a video tutorial with that assignment. The video tutorial will walk you through the royalty calculation process for your first word problem on the assignment. At this point, we've examined 7 distribution deal types. We just finished standard deals and calculating royalties. Let's move on to the next deal type, which is the license deal. With a license deal, the artist retains their copyright, but the label has the right to exploit the musical product for a specified period of time. This type of deal is traditionally good for distribution only, and 7 years is the usual time frame that the label has the distribution rights. Merge Records did this deal type with Arcade Fire at one point. Another deal type that is similar to the license deal is the profit-sharing deal. Again, the artist retains the copyright. The difference is that the net profits are split between the distributor and the artist. To get a deal like this, the artist needs a built-in audience. The Handelman Corporation, a large rack jobber that is now dissolved, did a 50-50 profit-sharing deal with Unwritten Law back in the early 2000s. The final deal type that we will examine is the self-distribution deal. This is where the indie artist and small record label start, but this is also where some larger artists are heading. It may be more work, but if you have the energy put into self-distribution, it can really pay off. Ultimately, if an artist or label wants a distribution deal, they have to start off with self-distributing. Without verified sales numbers, it is nearly impossible to get a physical distribution deal. If you just want an online distribution deal, that's a whole nother story, but you can self-distribute on the internet as well. Distributing to retailers is really a consignment business, no matter how you look at it. Ultimately, they can return all of your albums and get their money back. As a self-distributor, your primary focus is to get your music into retail and get it promoted. Start with consignment. Better Than Ezra did. They started out by consigning 25,000 units through small retailers. With their verified sales numbers, they were able to get a distribution deal with WEA through Elektra Records. Slip and Slide Records out of Miami, Florida also started out with consignment-based sales. They also ended up with a WEA distribution deal. Beyond the regular record retailers, to self-distribute, an artist needs to utilize what we call lifestyle accounts. These lifestyle accounts are retailers that do not sell records traditionally. For instance, Godsmack started out selling albums through a local comic book shop. Getting that lifestyle account helped propel them to success. A lifestyle account is a very targeted account based on a group of people with similar interest. As a distributor of music, you must know your market and where to find them, whether it's in a tattoo shop or a surf and skate shop. That wraps up our 10 deal types. To review, we examined distributing through another label, producer deals, pressing and distribution, joint ventures, upstream deals, equity deals, standard deals, license deals, profit-sharing deals, and self-distribution. Now that you know the basics about 10 popular distribution deals, what deal type would you prefer if you were an artist? Would you prefer to self-distribute for the lifetime of your career? Or get a pressing and distribution deal with a true distributor? Or perhaps take a standard deal with a major music group? Post your response to our community discussion board. I would love to know your thoughts on the deals currently playing out in our industry.